Hey, I'm really glad you're here today. We're going to talk about the life of Steve Jobs. His story is not simple. It's not smooth. It's full of mistakes, doubts, and big risks. And that's exactly why it's so interesting. If you enjoy this content, subscribing to English to Inspire will help more people find these conversations. Let's go back to California in the 1950s. Imagine a quiet neighborhood with small houses and wide streets. A baby boy is born. His biological parents are young and not ready to raise him. So they make a painful decision. They give him up for adoption. That baby becomes Steve Jobs. He grows up with Paul and Clara Jobs. They are not rich. His father is a mechanic. He fixes cars in the garage. The garage smells like oil and metal. Little Steve watches carefully. His father shows him how to take things apart and put them back together. If you build something, his father says, make even the back look beautiful. Think about that for a moment. Even the part nobody sees should be well made. As a child, Steve feels different. At school, he gets bored easily. He plays pranks. He doesn't like rules. One teacher sees something special in him. She challenges him with harder work and even gives him small rewards. Slowly, he starts to care about learning. Have you ever had someone who believed in you before you believed in yourself? That can change everything. In high school, he meets a shy, quiet genius named Steve Wozniak. Wozniak loves electronics. He understands circuits and wires like they are a secret language. Steve is different. He is not the best engineer, but he knows how to see the big picture. He knows how to dream. One evening, the two friends sit together, surrounded by wires and small boards. They build a device called a blue box. It can trick the telephone system and make free, long-distance calls. It's illegal. It's risky. But they feel excited. They sell a few of these boxes to other students. Later, Steve says something important about that moment. He says if they hadn't built the blue box, there would be no Apple. Why? Because that was the first time they saw they could build something powerful with their own hands. Two young guys. No big company, no big money, just ideas and courage. After high school, Steve goes to Reed College in Oregon. But college is expensive. His adoptive parents use their savings to pay for it. After only 6 months, Steve drops out. It sounds crazy, right? He doesn't want to waste his parents' money on classes he doesn't care about. But here's the interesting part. Even after dropping out, he stays on campus. He sleeps on friends' floors. He returns Coke bottles to get 5 cents each for food. He walks 7 miles every Sunday to get a free meal at a temple. Life is not comfortable. It's messy and uncertain. One day he walks into a calligraphy class. Calligraphy is the art of beautiful writing. Different styles of letters, spacing, design. It seems useless for a future in technology. But he loves it. He learns about fonts and balance and beauty in text. Years later, when he helps create the first Macintosh computer, he remembers that class. That's why the Mac has beautiful fonts. Before that, most computers had ugly, simple text. He connects art and technology in a new way. Think about your own life. Maybe something you're learning now seems useless. Maybe it doesn't fit your plan. But what if it becomes important later? Steve didn't know the future. He just followed his curiosity. At this time, he is still searching. He travels to India. He looks for meaning. He experiments with different lifestyles. He is not focused yet. He is trying to understand himself. That confusion, that searching, slowly shapes the man he will become. And soon, that curious young man, who once felt different and lost, will return to California with a powerful idea forming in his mind, ready to build something in a simple garage that will change the world. When Steve came back to California, he wasn't famous. He wasn't rich. He was still searching. But something inside him felt stronger. He had seen new ideas. He had questioned life. And now he wanted to build something real. He found a job at a young video game company called Atari. The office was simple. People wore jeans and sandals. There were wires everywhere. Steve worked at night because he didn't always get along with others. He could be intense. He didn't like small talk. He wanted results. One day, Atari asked him to help design a game. But Steve knew he needed help. So he called his old friend, Steve Wozniak. Wozniak loved challenges. He stayed up all night building a new circuit board. When they finished, it worked beautifully. They split the money. It wasn't a huge amount, but it showed them something important. Together, they were powerful. Around this time, a quiet revolution was starting. Small computer clubs were meeting in California. One of them was the Homebrew Computer Club. Imagine a room full of hobbyists. Long hair, glasses, excited voices, people sharing ideas about personal computers. At that time, computers were huge machines. Only big companies or universities had them. Most people never touched one. Wozniak began designing his own computer board. He didn't do it for money. He did it for fun. He loved the puzzle. One evening, he showed Steve the design. It was simple but brilliant. Steve looked at it differently. He didn't just see a fun project. He saw a product. "Let's sell it," Steve said. They didn't have a factory. They didn't have investors. They had a garage, the garage at Steve's parents' house. Imagine that space, concrete floor, tools on the wall, a wooden table. Two young men working late into the night, soldering tiny parts onto boards. They started a company. They needed a name. Steve had just come back from working on an apple farm. He liked the word apple. It sounded friendly, not scary, not technical. So they called it Apple Inc. Their first product was the Apple I. It wasn't a complete computer like today. It was a board. Customers had to add their own keyboard and screen. But something amazing happened. A local store owner agreed to buy 50 units. That was a huge order for them. Now imagine the pressure. They had promised 50 computers, but they didn't even have the parts. They had no money to buy them. Steve convinced suppliers to give them materials on credit. That means they could pay later. It was risky. If they failed, they would owe money they didn't have. They worked day and night in that garage. Friends helped. Boards were built by hand. When they delivered the order and got paid, it felt like a small miracle. Have you ever worked so hard that finishing felt unreal? That's what this was like. Then came the Apple II. This time they wanted something more complete. A real personal computer. With a case. With color graphics. Easy to use. Steve pushed for design. He cared about how it looked. He wanted it to feel friendly, almost like an appliance in your home. When the Apple II launched, it changed everything. Sales grew fast. Money started coming in. The small garage company was becoming serious. Investors joined, offices grew bigger, more employees arrived. But success brought new tension. Steve was demanding. He wanted perfection. He pushed people hard. Some loved his passion. Others felt exhausted. He believed great products required extreme effort. Picture a meeting room, engineers sitting around a table, Steve walking back and forth. "It's not good enough," he says. Sometimes he was right. Sometimes he was too harsh. But he refused to accept average work. Apple was no longer just two friends in a garage. It was becoming one of the fastest growing companies in America. And Steve, still in his 20s, was now leading something much bigger than himself. But as the company grew, so did his ambition. He didn't just want to build computers. He wanted to build something revolutionary, something that would make technology simple and beautiful for everyone. And that dream would soon lead to a new project inside Apple, a project called Macintosh, where excitement, creativity, and conflict would begin to rise at the same time. Inside Apple Inc., the energy was electric. The company was growing fast. Money was coming in. People were excited. But Steve wanted more. He didn't just want a successful computer. He wanted a computer that felt alive. At that time, most computers were cold and complicated. Black screens, green letters. You had to type commands. It felt like talking to a machine that didn't care about you. Steve hated that feeling. He believed computers should be friendly, easy, almost human. One day he visited a research center called Xerox PARC. There he saw something shocking. A computer with a graphical interface. It had windows, icons. You could move things with a small device called a mouse. Instead of typing commands, you could click. Imagine Steve standing there, eyes wide open. He saw the future. He knew this was it. Back at Apple, he became obsessed with a new project called Macintosh. The team working on it was small at first. They felt like rebels inside the company. They even had a pirate flag on their building. Steve told them, "It's better to be a pirate than to join the Navy." He wanted them to think differently. The Macintosh team worked in a separate building. Late nights, pizza boxes, coffee cups everywhere. Engineers sleeping under desks. It felt like a startup again, even though Apple was already big. There was one young engineer, nervous but talented. He showed Steve an early version of the Mac. It worked, but it was slow. Steve looked at it and said, "This is too slow. It needs to be faster." The engineer tried to explain the limits. The technology wasn't ready. Steve didn't accept that. He walked to a whiteboard and did simple math. If it saves a person 10 seconds a day and 1,000,000 people use it, that's years of human life saved. He believed speed mattered deeply. He pushed and pushed. Sometimes people cried after meetings with him. He could be harsh. He could say something was garbage without soft words. Have you ever worked with someone who expected so much that it scared you? That was Steve. But here's the strange part. Many people later said they did their best work because of him. He made them believe they could do impossible things. He created what some called a reality distortion field. That means he could make you believe something difficult was possible. In 1984, the Macintosh was ready to launch. The team was nervous. This wasn't just a product. It was a statement. Apple aired a famous commercial during the Super Bowl. The ad showed a gray world where everyone followed rules blindly. Then a woman runs in and throws a hammer at a giant screen. The message was clear. The Macintosh would break the old system. When the Mac was introduced on stage, Steve pulled it out of a small bag. The computer spoke with a digital voice. The audience cheered. It felt magical. For a moment, Steve was at the top of the world, young, brilliant, leading a revolution. But success didn't last long. The Macintosh was beautiful. It was friendly, but it was expensive, and it didn't have enough software yet. Sales were slower than expected. Inside Apple, tension grew. Some executives believed Steve was too emotional, too unpredictable. The CEO at the time was John Sculley. Steve had personally convinced him to join Apple. He once asked Sculley, "Do you want to sell sugar water for the rest of your life, or come with me and change the world?" That line was powerful, and Sculley said yes. Now they were starting to disagree. Meetings became cold. Arguments became frequent. The board of directors watched carefully. The company was making millions, but the internal fight was growing. Imagine being in your 20s running a huge company, and suddenly people start questioning you. People you once inspired. The dream of Macintosh was turning into a battle for control, and soon Steve would face something he never expected. He would be pushed out of the very company he helped create. The atmosphere inside Apple Inc. was changing. It didn't feel like the garage anymore. It didn't feel like pirates building the future. It felt political. Quiet conversations. Closed doors. Careful smiles. Steve could feel it. Sales of the Macintosh were not as strong as expected. The computer was beautiful, yes, but it was expensive, and many businesses still preferred simpler machines. Some people inside Apple blamed Steve. They said he cared too much about design and not enough about business reality. The tension between Steve and John Sculley grew slowly, then all at once. At first, they had admired each other. Steve had convinced Sculley to leave a safe job and join Apple. He believed they would change the world together. But now their meetings felt different. Imagine a long table, executives sitting quietly, Steve speaking with passion, Sculley responding with calm corporate language. Numbers, charts, sales reports. Two very different minds in the same room. Steve wanted to keep pushing the Macintosh forward. He wanted more control. He believed he knew what customers would love, even before they knew it themselves. Sculley and the board were worried. They wanted stability, predictable growth. One day, Steve tried to take back control of the Macintosh division. He believed Sculley was planning to limit his power. But Sculley found out. The board had to choose. Think about that moment. You're 30 years old. You started the company in your parents' garage. It's your dream. And now a group of executives is deciding your future. The board sided with Sculley. Steve was removed from his leadership role. He still had the title of chairman, but no real power. Slowly it became clear. He was being pushed out. Later he described that period as devastating. He felt publicly embarrassed. He felt like he had failed. He once said it felt like being hit in the stomach. Imagine that pain. Not just losing a job, losing your identity. He had spent years telling everyone Apple was his life. Now he was outside the building. For a few months, he didn't know what to do. He thought about leaving Silicon Valley. He even considered becoming a teacher. He met with old mentors. He walked alone, thinking, have you ever built something with your heart and then lost it? It can make you question everything. But something interesting happened during that dark time. After the shock passed, he began to feel lighter. He once said that being fired freed him. It removed the weight of success. He was a beginner again. That feeling of being a beginner gave him energy. Soon he started a new company called Next. The goal was to build powerful computers for universities. He gathered a small team of talented people. Many followed him because they believed in his vision. Even after Apple, Next computers were beautiful, black cubes, elegant design, advanced technology, but they were very expensive. Sales were small. Again, it wasn't a big commercial success. Around the same time, Steve made another decision that seemed strange. He bought a small animation studio from George Lucas. The studio was not famous. It was losing money. Most people thought it was a bad investment. The studio's name was Pixar. At first, Pixar mostly created short animated films and computer graphics for advertisements. It was interesting, but not profitable. Steve invested millions of his own money to keep it alive. Years passed. No big success. Imagine that. You're already known as the guy who was fired from Apple. Your new computer company isn't making much money. Your animation studio is losing money. People might whisper, maybe he was just lucky the first time. But Steve didn't quit. He believed deeply in the power of creativity and technology together. He believed storytelling could change how people feel. In that small animation studio, something special was slowly growing. A group of artists and engineers were experimenting with a new kind of movie, a full-length film made completely with computer animation. It sounded impossible, too expensive, too risky. But that impossible dream at Pixar would soon bring Steve back into the spotlight in a way no one expected. Inside the small offices of Pixar, the mood was strange. There was talent everywhere, artists drawing characters, engineers writing code, people laughing in hallways. But money was tight, very tight. Steve had already invested millions of his own dollars. Month after month, Pixar was losing money. Friends told him to sell it. Advisors warned him it was too risky. But he refused. Imagine walking into that building in the early 1990s. Simple desks, storyboards on the walls, sketches of toys with big eyes. The team believed they could create the first full-length animated movie made completely by computers. No one had done it before. It sounded crazy. The big partner for this dream was the Walt Disney Company. Disney agreed to distribute the film, but the pressure was huge. If the movie failed, Pixar might disappear. The film was called Toy Story. Picture the team working late at night, animators adjusting tiny details in a character's smile, engineers fixing bugs in complex software, coffee cups everywhere. Some days were exciting. Other days were full of fear. At one point, Disney executives watched an early version of the movie. They didn't like it. They said the main character, Woody, felt mean and unlikable. Production stopped. The team felt crushed. Imagine spending months on a project and hearing, "This doesn't work." Steve could have panicked. Instead, he supported the team. They rewrote the story. They softened Woody's personality. They worked even harder. Slowly, the film began to shine. When Toy Story was finally released in 1995, something magical happened. Families filled theaters. Children laughed. Adults felt emotional. It wasn't just a technical success. It was a beautiful story about friendship and jealousy and growing up. The movie earned hundreds of millions of dollars. Pixar went public on the stock market shortly after. In one day, Steve became a billionaire. Think about that moment. Just 10 years earlier, he had been fired from Apple. People doubted him. Now he was back on top, but in a completely different industry. Have you ever noticed how life can surprise you? Sometimes your biggest success comes from the place you least expect. Meanwhile, something else was happening. Back at Apple Inc., things were not going well. The company was struggling. Too many products, confusing strategy, falling sales. The magic felt gone. Apple needed a modern operating system. And guess what? The software from Steve's company, Next, was advanced and stable. In 1996, Apple decided to buy Next. That decision brought Steve back to the company he had started. At first, he was only an advisor. He walked through the same hallways again, but now he was different, older, calmer, wiser from failure. Employees watched him carefully. Was he the same intense leader? Or had he changed? Soon, Apple's CEO left. The company was in trouble. Steve stepped in as interim CEO. He even joked that it meant ICEO, but behind the joke, there was serious pressure. Imagine returning to a place that once rejected you. The same building, the same name, but now you have a second chance. Steve made quick decisions. He cut many products. He simplified everything. He drew a simple grid on a whiteboard. 4 boxes, that's it. He said Apple would focus on only 4 great products instead of dozens of average ones. People were shocked. Jobs were lost. Projects were canceled. But slowly, clarity returned. He also made a surprising deal with Microsoft. On stage, he announced a partnership. Some Apple fans were angry. Microsoft had been a rival for years. But Steve understood something important. Pride doesn't save companies. Smart decisions do. Apple was still fragile. It was not yet the powerful giant we know today. But a new energy was forming again. And in that fragile moment, with fewer products and a clearer vision, Steve and his team began designing something colorful and friendly that would signal Apple's true comeback. When Steve returned to Apple Inc., the company felt tired. Too many products, too many confusing names. Customers didn't know what to buy. Employees didn't know what to focus on. It was messy. Steve hated messy. One morning he gathered the leadership team in a simple meeting room. He walked to a whiteboard. He drew a big square. Then he divided it into 4 smaller squares. That was it. 4 boxes. He said Apple would build only 4 computers. 1 for consumers, 1 for professionals, a desktop and a laptop for each. People looked at each other. Could it really be that simple? But Steve believed in focus. He often said that saying no is more important than saying yes. Think about your own life. How many things are you trying to do at the same time? Sometimes cutting options creates power. Soon a new project began. It was a computer that didn't look like any other. At that time, most computers were gray boxes. Boring, cold. The new machine would be colorful, friendly, almost playful. That computer became the iMac. Imagine the first time people saw it. A bright, transparent blue case you could almost see inside. It looked more like a piece of art than a machine. When Steve presented it on stage in 1998, he smiled with confidence. He believed beauty mattered, and customers agreed. The iMac sold fast, very fast. It saved Apple from financial disaster. Employees felt hope again. The company was alive. Around this time, Steve also began working closely with a designer named Joni Eve. Joni was quiet and thoughtful. He cared deeply about simplicity. The two men formed a strong partnership. They would walk together, holding prototypes, talking about curves and materials. Picture them in a white room, a table in the center, a simple device on top. They would touch it, turn it around, ask, "Does this feel right?" They weren't just building electronics. They were shaping experiences. A few years later, another idea appeared. Music was becoming digital. People were downloading songs from the internet, often illegally. Music players were clumsy and hard to use. Steve saw an opportunity. In 2001, Apple introduced the iPod, a small white device, a simple wheel. 1,000 songs in your pocket, Steve said on stage. Imagine holding it for the first time. Smooth, light, clean design. It felt different from anything else. At first, some critics laughed. They said, "Who needs this?" But users loved it. The iPod worked beautifully with iTunes software. It was easy, simple. That word again. Simple. Sales grew. Apple was no longer just a computer company. It was becoming a lifestyle brand. White earbuds became a symbol. You could see them on buses, in parks, and airports. Have you ever noticed how one small device can change daily habits? Suddenly, people carried their entire music collection everywhere. But Steve wasn't finished. He began thinking about phones. At that time, phones had tiny screens and physical keyboards. Browsing the internet was painful. The experience was bad. Steve hated bad experiences. Inside Apple, a secret project started. A small team worked behind closed doors. The goal was ambitious. Combine a phone, a music player, and an internet device into one simple product. Many engineers doubted it. The technology was not easy. Touchscreens were new. Batteries were limited. But Steve pushed them. He believed it could be done. Imagine the tension, long nights, arguments about tiny details, the curve of the glass, the feel of a swipe. In January 2007, Steve walked onto a stage in a black turtleneck and jeans. The audience waited. He said, "Today we are introducing 3 revolutionary products." He repeated it. An iPod, a phone, an internet communicator. Then he smiled. "These are not 3 separate devices. This is one device." It was the iPhone. The crowd erupted. People sensed something big was happening. But even then, few understood how deeply this small device would change daily life. When the iPhone was released, long lines formed outside Apple Inc. stores. People waited for hours. Some even camped overnight. Imagine the excitement in the air. Strangers talking. Reporters filming. Employees clapping as customers walked in. Holding the iPhone felt different. There were no physical keys on the front, just a smooth screen. You touched it and it responded. You moved your finger and photos moved with you. It felt almost magical. At first, some experts were skeptical. They said the phone was too expensive. They said it didn't have a physical keyboard. They said the battery couldn't be replaced. But users didn't care about those details. They cared about how it felt to use. Have you ever used something that just feels right? That's what people felt. Soon Apple introduced the App Store. Suddenly, small developers around the world could create apps for the iPhone, games, tools, social networks. The phone became more powerful every year. Think about how your daily life changed. Photos, maps, music, messages, all in your pocket. Taxi rides ordered with a tap. Food delivered to your door. The world became smaller. Inside Apple, Steve was deeply involved in every detail. He reviewed icons. He argued about shades of color. He rejected designs that felt almost right. For him, almost was not enough. One story from an engineer explains this well. The engineer showed Steve a prototype with a glass screen. Steve asked if it could resist scratches. The engineer wasn't sure. Steve contacted a glass manufacturer and pushed them to create stronger glass in months. That glass became standard on the iPhone. He demanded a lot, sometimes too much, but he believed customers deserved the best experience possible. In 2010, Apple introduced another product, a tablet called the iPad. Again, critics asked, why do we need this? But once people used it, they understood. It was simple, comfortable for reading, perfect for watching videos, easy for children and grandparents. Apple's value grew rapidly. The company that had once been close to bankruptcy was now one of the most valuable in the world. But behind the scenes, something else was happening. In 2004, a few years before the iPhone launch, Steve had been diagnosed with a rare form of pancreatic cancer. At first, he kept it private. He continued working. He appeared thin sometimes, but still energetic on stage. Imagine carrying that secret while running one of the biggest companies in the world. He believed in controlling his destiny. At first, he tried alternative treatments. Later, he had surgery. For some time, he seemed better. He returned to work. He launched products. He stood on stage smiling. But his body was fighting a serious battle. Have you ever tried to stay strong while dealing with something heavy inside? It takes enormous energy. In 2005, he gave a speech at Stanford University. In that speech, he talked openly about death. He said remembering that he would die one day helped him make important decisions. It helped him focus on what truly mattered. He told students, your time is limited, so don't waste it living someone else's life. Simple words, but powerful. As years passed, Steve appeared thinner. He took medical leaves from Apple. During product launches, people watched him carefully. Was he okay? Would he return? Inside the company, leadership slowly prepared for the future. Tim Cook, a calm and steady executive, took more responsibility. Steve knew he could not control everything forever. But even as his health declined, his desire to create never disappeared. He continued reviewing designs. He continued giving feedback. He wanted Apple to remain strong, even without him. And as his body weakened, the question became clearer and heavier. What would happen to Apple and to the world he helped shape when he was no longer there to guide it. As the years passed, Steve Jobs knew something most people try not to think about. His time was limited. The cancer was serious. Some days he felt strong. Other days were harder. But he kept showing up. Inside Apple Inc., there was quiet preparation. Steve was still the leader, but he was also thinking about the future. He didn't want Apple to depend on one person. He wanted it to be guided by strong values and clear thinking. Tim Cook, who had joined Apple years earlier, was calm and steady, very different from Steve. He was not dramatic. He was not loud, but he was disciplined. He understood operations, supply chains, and global systems. Steve trusted him. Imagine a private meeting between them. No cameras. No audience. Just two men talking honestly about responsibility. Steve understood that leadership is not about ego. It's about continuity. It's about building something that lasts. In 2011, Steve stepped down as CEO. He recommended that Tim Cook become the next CEO. That decision was not emotional. It was thoughtful. He chose stability for the company he loved. Around this time, Steve spent more time at home with his family. His wife, Laureen, and his children were central in his life, even if he had not always balanced work and family perfectly. Illness can change perspective. It can make you slow down and look at what truly matters. Friends who visited him said he was still curious, still asking questions, still thinking about design and products. Even when his body was weak, his mind stayed active. On October 5th, 2011, the world received the news. Steve Jobs had died at the age of 56. People gathered outside Apple stores. They left flowers, handwritten notes, apples with a single bite taken out. Candles flickered at night. Strangers stood together quietly. Why did so many people feel emotional about a businessman? Because his products were part of their daily lives. Their music, their photos, their conversations. For many, Apple devices were connected to personal memories. A first song downloaded. A message from someone they loved. A photo of a child. Have you ever noticed how tools can become part of your story? After his death, many famous leaders spoke about him. But what mattered more were the ordinary people. Students, designers, developers. They said he made them believe that creativity and technology could work together. He once said that the people who are crazy enough to think they can change the world are the ones who do. That sentence stayed in many minds. But let's be honest, Steve was not perfect. He could be impatient. He could be difficult. Some people felt hurt by his sharp words. His personality had rough edges. That's important to remember. Success does not mean perfection. It means growth. Over time, he matured. He learned from failure. Being fired from Apple changed him deeply. It softened some parts and strengthened others. Think about your own setbacks, maybe a rejection, maybe a failure. In the moment, it feels terrible, but years later, you might see it differently. Steve once said that getting fired was one of the best things that happened to him. It forced him to begin again. It removed the weight of expectations. It gave him space to rediscover joy in building. His life leaves us with big questions. What does it mean to build something meaningful? How much should we push ourselves? How do we balance ambition with health, work with family? As Apple continued under Tim Cook's leadership, the company remained strong. New products came. The culture of focus and simplicity continued. The foundation Steve helped build was solid. But beyond products and profits, his story invites something more personal. It invites you to think about your own curiosity, your own ideas, the small interests you follow without knowing why. And when you look at your own path, with its mistakes and unexpected turns, you may start to see how even the difficult moments are quietly shaping something bigger inside you. When we look at the life of Steve Jobs, it's easy to focus only on the big moments: the iPhone launch, the return to Apple Inc., the standing ovations. But the real lessons are often hidden in smaller scenes. Think again about that young man sleeping on friends' floors after dropping out of college, returning Coke bottles for coins, walking miles for a free meal. At that time, there was no guarantee of success, no clear path, just curiosity. Have you ever been in a moment like that? When you don't fully know where you're going, it can feel uncomfortable. But uncertainty can also be creative. It forces you to explore. Steve followed what interested him, even when it didn't look practical. A calligraphy class, a trip to India, a small animation studio that was losing money. From the outside, these choices looked random, but later they connected in powerful ways. This is something important. You cannot connect the dots looking forward. You can only connect them looking backward. That's what he explained in his speech at Stanford University. When you are living through confusion, you rarely see the full picture. So what do? You trust your curiosity. You do the next honest step. Another lesson from Steve's life is about focus. When he returned to Apple, he cut many projects. That must have been painful. People lost work they believed in. But he understood that energy spreads thin when you try to do everything. Look at your own goals for a moment. Are you trying to improve 5 areas at once? 10? What if you chose 1 or 2 and gave them real attention? Steve often said that innovation is saying no to 1,000 things. That's not easy. Saying no feels like losing options. But it creates space for excellence. There's also the lesson of courage. Remember when he was fired, publicly removed from the company he created. Many people would have disappeared quietly. They would have accepted a comfortable role somewhere else. Instead, he started again. He built next. He invested in Pixar. Both projects looked uncertain. But those years away from Apple shaped him into a stronger leader. Failure, when faced honestly, can refine you. It can remove arrogance. It can teach humility. But only if you stay engaged. Only if you don't give up. There's also something about standards. Steve demanded high quality, sometimes too aggressively. But he believed that details matter. The inside of a product, the feel of a button, the way text appears on a screen. Think about the work you do. Do you rush through it? Or do you care about the small things? Excellence is often built in quiet moments when no one is watching. At the same time, this story reminds us of balance. He worked intensely. He pushed himself hard. His health struggles remind us that the body has limits. Ambition is powerful, but it must be handled carefully. So maybe the real lesson is not work nonstop. Maybe it is work deeply, but live wisely. He once said that remembering death helped him make decisions. That sounds heavy, but it's simple. If today were your last day, would you be proud of what you're building? If the answer is no for many days in a row, maybe something needs to change. That question is uncomfortable, but it can be clarifying. Steve's life was not smooth. It was full of sharp turns: adoption, dropping out, building in a garage, being fired, starting over, facing illness. Each phase shaped him. And when we step back and look at the full picture, we don't just see a businessman. We see a human being who kept choosing to create, even when the path was uncertain. When you think about Steve Jobs now, maybe you don't just see the black turtleneck or the bright stage lights. Maybe you see a young boy in a garage watching his father work carefully with tools. You see a college dropout sitting quietly in a calligraphy class. You see a man sitting alone after being fired, wondering what to do next. That's important, because success did not arrive in one moment. It was built slowly through curiosity, pain, risk, and stubborn belief. Imagine him in that garage again. Concrete floor, simple wooden table, soldering small parts onto a board with Steve Wozniak. No one was clapping. No reporters were watching. Just two friends trying to build something useful. Or picture him years later, backstage before introducing the iPhone. He must have felt pressure. What if it failed? What if people didn't understand it? Even after decades of success, risk was still there. Courage is not the absence of fear. It is moving forward despite fear. One thing that stands out in his story is belief. He believed technology could be beautiful. He believed ordinary people deserved powerful tools. He believed that small teams of passionate people could challenge giant companies. And sometimes he was wrong. Not every product succeeded. Not every decision was perfect, but he kept adjusting. He kept learning. Have you ever noticed how easy it is to quit when something becomes uncomfortable? It's tempting to choose safety, to avoid embarrassment, to protect your image. Steve didn't protect his image when he started again with Next or invested in Pixar. Those moves looked risky. Some people thought he was finished, but those side projects later became central to his comeback. There's also something about ownership in his life. Even as a young man, he took responsibility. When Apple struggled, he didn't blame customers. He simplified the company. When products weren't good enough, he demanded improvement. That mindset can apply anywhere. If something in your life feels messy, what can you simplify? What can you remove? What deserves your full attention? Another quiet lesson is about connecting art and logic. Steve cared about fonts, shapes, and colors. But he also cared about engineering and performance. He didn't see these as opposites. He believed creativity and discipline could work together. Maybe you've been told you are too creative or too analytical. What if you don't have to choose? What if your strength is the combination? Near the end of his life, when he spoke about death, he said it is life's change agent. That means it clears out the old to make way for the new. It sounds intense, but it's also natural. His time ended, but the company continued. The products evolved. Millions of people still carry devices influenced by his ideas. And now, here's the most important part. His story is not about becoming the billionaire. It's not about standing on a stage. It's about choosing to care deeply about what you build. You may never create a global company. That's fine. But you can choose to care about your craft, your relationships, your habits. Next time you feel uncertain about your path, remember that young man who dropped out of college and had no clear map. He didn't know the future. He just followed curiosity and worked with intensity. Next time you face failure, remember the man who was fired from his own company and felt humiliated. That moment didn't end his story. It redirected it. And next time you're tempted to accept something average, ask yourself quietly, can this be better? Then take one small step to improve it. If any of these ideas stayed in your mind today, hold them gently. Think about how they fit into your own life. And maybe, just maybe, you'll begin to see your own dots connecting in ways you can't yet imagine.